So earlier this year at the Edinburgh International Film Festival, Jim Ross sat down with SASHA COLLINGTON, who directed the British comedy Love Type D. Here's a little clip from that.
First of all, thank you for talking to me. Congratulations on the film, Love Type D. Am I right in saying it's your first feature film?
That's right, yeah. So it's my first feature as a writer-director.
Right. What was it about? How did this film come to be your first feature, or this story in particular?
Yeah. So I had a short film called Lunch Date that was basically about a young boy that's sent to dump his brother's girlfriend, and so that played some festivals, and there I met a man that wanted to invest in a feature. So at that point I hadn't actually written the feature, but he was very keen on those characters being in it, and so I thought, well, what can I do with these two characters? And I thought, well, she can either kind of pursue the boyfriend, but then what's interesting about that? And so that's why I kind of started to think about the idea of the gene, that what if she had always been broken up with by many, many people, and in the film we have her getting broken up by song as well. And what if it was to do with like a certain genetic disposition? Because I'm very interested in science, despite having no gift in science whatsoever.
So where did you come across this? Is it epigenetics? Is that the term?
So I read about epigenetics, and essentially, I'm not a scientist, but the idea of it is that kind of things that happen to you within your own lifetime can affect your genetic code, and so essentially your genes can be switched on or off by actually like events that happen to you within your own lifetime. And I thought that was like incredibly interesting, and so I like the idea that because of like a decision the main character made when she was 12, so going out with some boy for like 4.5 days, she's kind of trapped in this pattern for the rest of her life. And because I think it's very interesting, the idea of like romantic patterns. Are you forever dating exactly the same person but with a different hairdo, or are you forever making exactly the same mistakes? Are you always behaving a certain way in relationships and then blaming the other person, but then going and doing it all over again? And I think it's all those things that kind of helped me to develop the idea. But I think it was initially inspired by some articles I read about epigenetics and just about genes and behaviour, really.
I find it quite an interesting way to frame the film, just really because it even brings in the idea of nature versus nurture, really, and it's this idea of how much of it is how you were raised, your own experiences, and how much of it is just baked in, almost kind of like genetic fate, if you like.
Yeah.
Is that something you were trying to get through in the script? Kind of this, it's always a balance between the two. It's never one or the other, or?
Yeah, I think the film kind of like seeks to explore this sort of nature-nurture debate, and just the idea. Because I think there's a scientist out of California that was saying that he could predict what would happen to you from a baby, like whether you would get divorced or commit suicide. And I think, that whole idea of like, to what extent is your life predetermined, and to what extent are you master of your own destiny? And I think, I'm kind of very interested in that, because obviously no one quite knows the answer, and including people who are really clever. And so I think, the film sort of explores a bit that theme. So essentially, is the universe sabotaging Frankie, the main character, or essentially is it her behaviour that's driving people away? Is it her bad decisions that are creating problems in her life?
And one thing, I'm just wondering if this was, whether this was a conscious thing or it just comes about as a result of the approach to do it as a comedy. But one thing that I did quite like about it is it kind of subverts a little bit other romantic comedies, and you have this central character, Frankie, who is pining after an ex, effectively. I mean, that's what sets her off on this whole journey. But what's quite interesting about it is it's not really because she's seeking acceptance from him. It's actually kind of a self-improvement journey from the start. I mean, a lot of films that you'll go through this process, and then at the end it will kind of turn down and go, oh no, she doesn't need him And because that always seems to be the dynamic in terms of the genders there. But here, the reason she starts down this path is to try and improve herself, in terms of to try and overcome what she sees at the time anyway as this sort of disadvantage that she's been born with, effectively. Was that something you did consciously, or has that just come about as a result of the concept needing her to do that?
I think it is something I thought about, and I did think about like the conventions of the romantic comedy genre, and I did want to do something, I suppose, that was a little different, because I think, you know, obviously romantic comedies had this massive heyday. I guess it was in the 90s, probably when I was like a teenager, but I feel now, you know, the idea that somehow, you know, that the film has to end with like happy ever after, like until the credits roll, or you know, I feel that perhaps, you know, it feels maybe a bit old-fashioned, you know, and that people want something perhaps a little kind of more thought-provoking. I'm not sure, but yeah, so I think it was definitely something I thought about, like trying to kind of see if we could, you know, kind of do anything with the genre.
Yeah, it's funny you mention the heyday of romantic comedies in the 90s and the fact that they all need happy endings, because it's something that I grew up in the 90s as well, and that's kind of what I associate the romantic comedy being. Everything's, you know, very nicely tied up and everybody's happy and, you know, riding off into the sunset at the end. But if you go back a bit further than that and look at sort of older romantic comedies, and, you know, I mean, I suppose the obvious one to think of is probably Annie Hall or something like that, they don't always do that. It seemed to go through this period where it was, so it's kind of nice that you're returning to this idea of a happy ending or a meaningful ending isn't tied up in a relationship at the end of it being there.
Yeah, that's true, without having too much spoiler.
One thing I want to ask was, how did you go about finding Maeve, who plays the lead role of Frankie? Because she has quite a delicate balancing act to do, because she needs to be very likeable. We need to root for her, but at the same time she can't come across as perfect, because clearly she's not having a lot of luck necessarily in her interactions with people, so she can't come across as perfect. Did that feed into the casting process and how you came to find her? Or?
Yes, it was actually very hard to cast that role, and we saw a lot of different people, and I think it was something like 2 weeks. I mean, maybe it was 4 weeks from our shoot, but it was very close to the shoot and we hadn't cast the role. And I had seen her at a film in Berlin, I think it was the previous year, called Griff the Invisible, an Australian film. And I just found her so funny, and she was very deadpan and very serious but funny. And so in the middle of the night, I got on my laptop and I emailed her agent in Australia, and I was like, this is a bit crazy, but, you know, we're shooting this independent British comedy, and, you know, I just wonder, would she, you know, read for it? And and she did, and we ended up, she came over from Australia to do it. But she was just someone I had in my head for a while, because I think it is a delicate balance with the character, and also some of the things she does in the film are a little unethical, let's say. And I think, you know, it's also, you know, you do want people to feel sympathetic towards her and continue to feel sympathetic. So yeah, I was really, really pleased to have her on the project, and I think that she's got a great balance of comedy and deadpanness that feels, to me, entirely believable.
And the person who spends the most time on screen alongside her is Rudy, who plays Wilbur. And I was wondering, what made you want to have him, or less specifically someone who's much younger, a kid, be her kind of shepherd through this process that she goes on in the film?
Well, I'm very interested in like intergenerational friendships. I think it's sort of an interesting thing, kind of, you know, what you can learn from somebody quite a lot older or younger than you. And I guess what I like about, you know, I really enjoyed writing Wilbur. He was very fun to write for his lines and stuff. But I like the fact that because he has never had a relationship, because he's never fallen in love, he's too young, he's only 12. This is a whole world that isn't yet started for him, that, you know, in his life will happen. But I like the innocence that he doesn't understand yet how love functions, and therefore he has a certain pragmatism that that gives him a certain truth, you know, in the way he's able to see things. And so, you know, I also find it interesting the fact that, like, it's also, you know, his introduction in a way, because, you know, you don't know, like, has he had a female friend before? Is this the first female friend he's ever had, but she just happens to be 27? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I thought he was fantastic as well in that role. I thought both the leads did, and there's a lot of chemistry there. I thought it worked really superbly. What I was wondering was this because there's a lot of you know, the film's very funny, it's very engaging, but there is also quite a lot going on in terms of you know, relationships and how people deal with ending them, people's attitudes to them, and there's a lot going on there. What I was wondering is, what was it about the high concept comedy? Because I've seen you've spoken about the likes of Big and Groundhog Day being kind of inspirations for this. What was it about that approach, the high concept comedy, that you think communicates that best?
I guess I chose the concept. I mean, you know, yeah, as a way, I suppose, of exploring that idea that, you know, you know, that you can feel that you're uniquely sort of doomed to fail in a way that, you know, is quite particular to you, whilst others, you know, are kind of going to succeed alongside you. So I suppose the concept, you know, allowed for, I guess, a bit more movement in exploring the themes of, like, yeah, like, what happens to people after a breakup. Because I watched these very interesting TED Talks by this scientist called Helen Fisher, where she puts people in an MRI scanner who've just been dumped, basically, and it's about their brain, and actually what they discovered is that the attachment feelings increase. So whatever chemicals in the brain that are associated with attachment are actually stronger after someone's broken up with you. And you feel like that's so cruel of nature to make you feel more attached to somebody after a breakup than before. And so I think it's, you know, I think the concept, I suppose, allows, me to explore certain thematics within love, because obviously it is quite complicated. You know, people, you know, who are otherwise, you know, very sort of, you know, kind of put together in their lives, let's say, can go completely mad, you know, if they have a breakup, or if they, you know, and I think it's just that thing where, as human beings, you know, are we totally in control of our feelings, you know, when things kind of, you know, bad happen, and it's like how you deal with those things, I think, is interesting.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the MRI thing. It's almost like the physiological version of absence makes the heart grow fonder, I suppose.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So pivoting away from kind of the content of the film, obviously this is your first feature film. How have you found that process in terms of securing the financing and even getting cast and crew on board? How does that differ compared to the creation of the short films?
I think it's just a lot longer, like, time commitment. So I think definitely it's quite a transition to go from a short to a feature, and I think you know, it's a bit of a baptism of fire at first, I suppose, because it's definitely, especially when you're doing it on a low budget, it definitely feels that, you know, things can and do go wrong quite sort of frequently on an independent film shoot. It's I don't know if you watched Lost in La Mancha, but it feels like that's just an average day. You know, the whole of Lost in La Mancha is like one afternoon in Live Type D, you know, with always things going wrong. So I think the challenge is really on that budget level, you know, trying to get people who've got, you know, kind of enough experience in order, because it, you know, it is tough. Like, for example, I feel like organising a shoot has to be with a military precision, but if people haven't done it before, then, you know, it's a skill you acquire. So I think it's a balance in independent film between what you can afford and then how much money you perhaps lose on the day if your location falls through or lunch is delayed by 3 hours. And then, you know, with the finance, you know, I raised the finance for Love Type D, so that's something that I did, having not done before. You know, I did raise the finance for a short via Kickstarter, but that's completely different than, like, pitching to, like, private equity investors, and that's something, I suppose, a skill I acquired during the making of the film that probably is quite useful.
So what made you want to submit it or screen it at the Edinburgh Film Festival?
Well, I thought about it for a while, like with Edinburgh, because I'd come here like a very long time ago, and I really, really liked it. And I just think that like Edinburgh's got a great reputation. It's such like a beautiful city. So yeah, I was really keen for us to like have the film here, and I was really pleased, you know, to have the premiere here.
Are you planning to have the film go on the festival circuit for a while, or are you looking to kind of move to a sale and hopefully maybe distribution, or a bit of both?
I think a bit of both would be nice, because obviously going to film festivals is such a it's almost like the reward at the end of like this marathon you've had to run.
Yeah.
You know, where you get invited at the end to a big party, to try and forget like all the work you had to do. Yeah, so I think ideally it would be nice to do both, I think. Yeah, but obviously with the film, you know, with a comedy, I think it's always nice to watch it with an audience. So you know, it is very nice for me to kind of like sit in on like public screenings where there are a lot of people. Yeah.
So I was wondering, you finished Love Type D. Obviously, you've said hopefully it'll go on the film festival circuit for a bit. But what's next for you in terms of production?
Well, I'm actually working on a couple ideas for like episodic series. So I want to keep in the comedy genre, and also in sort of doing things that are kind of like, I guess, also a bit high concept and a bit sciencey. I definitely love having a bit of science in the story. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. And then I'm also starting part-time an MBA, so I can build a company at the same time as developing the creative project. So basically looking to build a